There is a dangerous comfort in believing that American power is inevitable. We look at the stock market, we look at the dollar, and we tell ourselves that the foundation is solid, that no matter how chaotic our leadership becomes, the world has no choice but to rely on us. I am here to tell you that this assumption is dead wrong. What we are witnessing right now isn't strength, it is momentum. We are coasting on 80 years of institutional credit that is rapidly running out. While we are distracted by political theater, the global financial system is quietly, aggressively, pricing in a future without us. We are trading long-term leverage for short-term illusions, and the damage is becoming structural. This isn't about partisanship, it is about national survival. If we continue to treat our own credibility as a disposable asset, we are not going to crash. We are simply going to become irrelevant. I'm Ren Aoyama. I don't deal in reassurance, and I don't deal in partisan noise. I deal in the mechanics of power. If you are ready to understand the trajectory that everyone else is ignoring, make the choice to subscribe right now. Join this community. Listen closely. The clock is ticking, and we need to understand why. There is a dangerous comfort in looking at a stock chart and believing it tells you the truth about the world. We live in a moment where the surface of the American economy appears, to the casual observer, to be functioning. You look at the major indices, you look at the employment numbers, and you see a system that is agitated, yes, perhaps volatile, but fundamentally intact. The grocery bills are high, but the lights are on. The rhetoric is heated, but the banks are open. There is a collective, unspoken assumption that defines our current political life. The belief that the American economic engine is so large, so historically dominant, and so deeply entrenched that it can survive almost any amount of mismanagement. We assume that gravity applies to everyone else, but not to the United States dollar. We assume that chaos is something that happens in emerging markets, not here. We assume that no matter who sits in the Oval Office or what is said at a podium, the Treasury bond will remain the bedrock of global finance. I am here to tell you that this assumption is false. And not just false, it is the single greatest vulnerability we face as a nation right now. What we are witnessing is not stability. It is the momentum of a heavy object that hasn't hit the wall yet. We are mistaking the lingering after effects of 80 years of institutional credibility for current strength. We are coasting, and the friction is building faster than we want to admit. To understand why, you have to look past the ticker tape. You have to look at the architecture beneath the floorboards. Most people think of the US dollar as money, a way to buy things. But at the geopolitical level, the dollar is not money. It is a communication network. It is a treaty. It is a measure of trust. The reason the world transacts in dollars, the reason nations stockpile our debt, is not because they love us. It is because we are predictable. For nearly a century, the United States has sold one specific product to the world: certainty. We sold the certainty that our courts enforce contracts. We sold the certainty that our central bank operates independently of political whims. We sold the certainty that we do not default, that we do not confiscate, and that we do not weaponize our own currency against the system that supports it. That certainty is the load-bearing beam of the entire global economy. It is what allows us to borrow cheaply. It is what allows us to run deficits that would crush any other nation. It is what allows an American standard of living that is effectively subsidized by the rest of the world's desire for safety. But safety is not a natural resource. You don't mine it from the ground. It is manufactured. It is manufactured by institutions, by alliances, and by the discipline of leadership. Now, look at the signals coming from the commodities markets. Ignore the day-to-day noise and look at the trend lines. In gold, in copper, in strategic reserves, these markets are forward-looking mechanisms. When you see central banks in Asia and the Middle East quietly buying gold at record paces or diversifying their settlement mechanisms, they are not speculating. They are hedging. They are buying insurance against an American future they no longer trust. They are hedging against us. They are seeing what we are refusing to see, that the mechanical links between American power and global finance are rusting through. Consider the interplay between our currency and our geopolitical credibility. These two things are often discussed in separate rooms. The economists talk about interest rates. The foreign policy experts talk about treaties. But in the real world, they are the same conversation. When the United States signals that it is willing to break alliances or rewrite trade deals on the fly, or treat long-standing security guarantees as protection rackets, the market hears something very specific. It hears that the full faith and credit of the United States is now conditional. It hears that the rules are subject to change based on the mood of the executive. Once you introduce that kind of political risk into a reserve currency, you change the math for everyone holding it. You force every central bank manager, every sovereign wealth fund, every corporate treasurer in Tokyo, London, and Riyadh to ask a question they haven't had to ask since 1945. What if the Americans decide not to honor the deal? You might say this is alarmist. You might point to the fact that the dollar is still strong relative to the euro or the yen. But that is a relative strength, born of the fact that the rest of the world is weak, not that we are sound. It is a vote of least worst, not a vote of confidence. We are seeing the early tremors of a structural shift. When we talk about inflation, we usually talk about supply chains or money supply. We rarely talk about the inflation that comes from a loss of institutional standing. But if the world demands a higher risk premium to hold US debt because they are worried about our political stability, that cost flows directly into the mortgage rates of a family in Ohio. If oil markets price in a geopolitical risk premium because they don't know if the US is going to stabilize or destabilize a shipping lane, that cost hits the gas pump in Georgia. Our economy is not a sealed ecosystem. It is an open system that relies entirely on the premise that the United States is the adult in the room. The danger we face right now is that we have stopped acting like the adult, but we still expect the privileges of one. We are normalizing stress signals that should be terrifying. We treat threats to the Federal Reserve's independence as political theater rather than a direct attack on the value of the currency in your pocket. We treat trade wars as tough negotiating tactics rather than sand in the gears of the very supply chains we depend on. We are pulling bricks out of the foundation and congratulating ourselves that the house hasn't fallen down yet. This is the illusion of control. We believe that American dominance is automatic, that it is a law of nature. We believe we can disrupt, threaten, and cajole without consequence because where else are they going to go? But history is littered with empires that thought they were too big to fail, right up until the moment the financing dried up. The British pound was the world's reserve currency, until it wasn't. It didn't happen overnight. It happened through a slow, grinding erosion of trust, a series of bad political choices, and a failure to recognize that credibility is a finite asset. We are burning through our asset. The stability you see around you is not resilience. It is inertia. The system is still moving forward because it was pushed hard for decades by serious people who understood the machinery. But the friction is increasing, the bolts are loosening, and we are entering a period where the people at the controls are not interested in maintenance. They are interested in testing how fast they can spin the engine before it cracks. American economic power is not magic. It is conditional. It depends on the world believing that we are rational, reliable, and consistent. If we shatter that belief, if we convince the world that the United States is now a source of risk rather than a source of safety, the consequences will not be linear. They will not be a slow decline. They will be a sudden, violent repricing of our reality. The foundation is already cracking. The question is no longer if we are under stress. The question is how much more pressure the structure can take before the illusion collapses entirely. This brings us to the operational reality of the moment. We need to look clearly at the specific mechanism being used to dismantle this stability. We need to name the philosophy that has taken hold of the levers of power. Let's call it what it is. This is the weaponization of instability. On the surface, the rhetoric sounds appealing to a frustrated electorate. You hear the language of leverage. You hear about America first. You hear a doctrine that claims to be a muscular defense of national interest. A new Monroe Doctrine for the 21st century, designed to protect the American worker and the American border from a world that has taken advantage of us. It frames every interaction as a zero-sum contest. If they are winning, we must be losing. And the only way to fix it is to flip the table. It sells itself as strength. It promises that if we are unpredictable, if we are aggressive, if we are willing to threaten the things others hold dear, we will extract better deals. It posits that chaos is a ladder we can climb. But here is the strategic error that is currently rotting out our position. Chaos is a tool for the challenger. Chaos is a weapon for the insurgent. Chaos is never a strategy for the incumbent. The United States is the house. We own the casino. We wrote the rules. When the house starts flipping over the blackjack tables and threatening the patrons to squeeze out a few extra chips, it doesn't look like strength. It looks like a liquidation sale. We are witnessing a strategic mutation. We are moving from a model where the United States acts as the architect of the global order to a model where the United States acts as a landlord, breaking down the door to collect rent. This is not a matter of style. This is a fundamental shift in the physics of power. Under this new doctrine, we see the substitution of economic statecraft with unilateral coercion. We see tariffs threatened not as precise policy instruments to correct trade imbalances, but as blunt force trauma to bully allies and adversaries alike. We see security guarantees, the absolute bedrock of the nuclear age, treated as subscription services that can be canceled if the monthly check doesn't clear. And we need to talk about how the market responds to this. There is a myth that markets panic in the face of this kind of, quote, strongman behavior. That is incorrect. Markets do not panic. Markets calculate. Capital is rational. When the President of the United States suggests that he might ignore a treaty or interfere with the Federal Reserve to juice the stock market or weaponize the dollar to punish a political enemy, the global financial system does not scream. It adjusts. It recalculates the risk premium of doing business with America. The, quote, Donroe Doctrine, this hybridization of nationalism and transactional extortion, does not make us feared in the way that generates compliance. It makes us feared in the way that generates circumvention. When you treat your allies like tributaries, they don't just pay up. They start building their own roads. We are seeing immediate, rational responses from Europe, from Asia, and from the global South. They are not responding with hysteria. They are responding with hedging. They are asking, how do we build a supply chain that doesn't pass through an American choke point? How do we settle trade without touching the SWIFT system? How do we store value in something that cannot be sanctioned by a tweet? This is the great danger of transactional power. It works until it doesn't. You can extract value in the short term. You can bully a company into building a factory or force a country to buy a shipment of soybeans. But you are burning the furniture to heat the house. Every time we use American financial dominance as a cudgel to settle a short-term political score, we incentivize the rest of the world to build an alternative to American financial dominance. We are actively teaching the world that the dollar is a trap. And this is where the domestic cost becomes invisible but lethal. This doctrine treats institutional damage as acceptable collateral. If the Department of Justice, or the Treasury, or the intelligence community stands in the way of a deal, then they are attacked as the enemy. But those institutions are the only reason our power is scalable. Without the credibility of our institutions, the United States is just a very large country with a lot of guns and a lot of debt. We are seeing the shift from a systemic power, one that derives strength from being the hub of the wheel, to a transactional power, one that has to fight for every single spoke. This is not shaking things up. This is a reprogramming of global expectations. We are telling the world that the United States is no longer a stabilizer. We are an unpredictable variable. And in the world of finance, in the world of long-term strategic planning, an unpredictable variable is a liability. The tragedy is that this is self-inflicted. We are taking the greatest asymmetric advantage in the history of geopolitics, the fact that the world trusts us with its money and its safety, and we are trading it for a sugar high of short-term leverage. The audience needs to understand that the bill for this behavior does not come due immediately. It accumulates. It accumulates in the form of investment that goes elsewhere. It accumulates in alliances that go silent when we need them most. It accumulates in the quiet, steady movement of capital away from the dollar and toward hard assets. We are weaponizing instability, thinking we are pointing the gun at our enemies. But the recoil is destroying the very mechanism that makes us a superpower. We are not making a deal. We are breaking the system. There is a firewall that exists in the American mind, a psychological barrier we have all erected to help us sleep at night. It is the belief that no matter how chaotic the White House gets, the machinery of the state is insulated. We tell ourselves that there are adults in the room. We tell ourselves that the Federal Reserve is independent. We tell ourselves that the Department of Justice follows the statute, not the tweet. We believe that the economy acts as a separate organism from the government, that Wall Street runs on math while Washington runs on noise. That belief is a relic. It is a luxury we can no longer afford. What we are watching now is the deliberate dismantling of that firewall. The instability we discussed earlier, the chaotic foreign policy, the transactional bullying, is not staying overseas. It is bleeding back home. It is crossing the barrier and infecting the central nervous system of the American economy. We are entering the phase of institutional erosion. And this is where the math stops working. Consider the Federal Reserve. For decades, the power of the dollar rested on a simple, sacred covenant. The president does not set interest rates. The president does not dictate money supply. The central bank makes hard, unpopular decisions to preserve the value of the currency, protected from the short-term desperation of politicians facing re-election. But what happens when that independence is treated as an act of treason? When the executive branch begins to publicly berate monetary policy, when it threatens to fire the chair for not cutting rates to juice a rally, when it floats the idea of bringing the printing press directly under the control of the Oval Office, the market does not see this as political pressure. The market sees it as a default on the covenant. The moment global capital suspects that the US dollar is being managed for the political benefit of one man rather than the economic stability of the nation, the risk premium on American assets spikes. We are already seeing the feedback loop begin. Here is how the loop works. It is mechanical, it is brutal, and it ignores your party affiliation. Step 1. The administration signals that it wants easy money and weak institutions to boost short-term numbers. Step 2. Creditors, the people buying our debt, realize the referee has been fired. They realize inflation is now a political tool, not an economic enemy. Step 3. They demand a higher return to hold our paper. Yields go up. The cost of borrowing for the government explodes. Step 4. To pay those higher costs, the government has to print more money or borrow even more, fueling the very inflation they tried to ignore. It is a death spiral of credibility. We are seeing the blurring of lines between executive power and economic governance. When the rule of law becomes the rule of the ruler, contracts lose their value. If a company can be targeted by the state for insufficient loyalty, if a merger can be blocked because a CEO criticized a policy, then the United States is no longer a free market. It is a command economy with better marketing. And the world knows how to price a command economy. They price it like a chaotic emerging market. They price it with a discount. This is the great irony of strongman economics. It produces a weak balance sheet. The authoritarian impulse is allergic to the kind of boring, procedural stability that makes a currency the global reserve. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot have absolute, unchecked power in the executive branch and be the trusted safe haven for the world's wealth. Those two concepts are mutually exclusive. The dollar is the currency of trust. Dictatorships run on fear. You can run a country on fear, but you cannot run the global financial system on it. As these institutions erode, as the DOJ is weaponized, as the Fed is politicized, as the civil service is purged of expertise and replaced with loyalty, we are not just losing norms. We are losing our credit rating. Not the rating on a piece of paper from an agency, but the real-time credit rating of the global market. The feedback loop is accelerating. The more we erode our institutions to project strength, the weaker our economic foundation becomes. The weaker the foundation, the more the administration feels compelled to intervene with force, with tariffs, with threats. And the more they intervene, the faster the institutions erode. We are importing volatility. We are taking the chaos of our politics and injecting it directly into the bloodstream of our commerce. The result is that inflation becomes structural, not cyclical. You cannot fix inflation with interest rates if the market doesn't believe the central bank is free to act. You cannot fix a trade deficit if your trading partners are actively decoupling from your system because they fear your courts are rigged. We have to understand that this damage is cumulative. It is not something that snaps back the moment an election goes the other way. Credibility is like a coral reef. It takes centuries to build, but you can bleach it dead in a few years of bad temperatures. Once the world decides that the United States is no longer a nation of laws, but a nation of men, the premium we pay to exist in this world goes up permanently. We are becoming a high-maintenance superpower. We are becoming a risky bet. This is no longer a foreign policy problem. This is no longer a Washington problem. This is a problem for anyone who holds a dollar, anyone who has a pension, anyone who relies on the stability of prices. The walls are down. The insulation is gone. The damage is not just coming, it is here. It is structural. And the longer we pretend that this is just another political cycle, the harder it will be to stop the slide. We are sabotaging our own engine while the car is moving at 90 miles an hour. There is a final, seductive lie that keeps us paralyzed. It is the myth of the rubber band. It is the belief that nations, like markets, naturally snap back to the mean. We tell ourselves that this era of instability is an aberration, a fever dream. We convince ourselves that once the political noise dies down, the world will simply exhale, reset the clock to 2015, and the United States will automatically resume its position at the undisputed center of the table. We tell ourselves that the damage is reversible. But we are here, looking at the trajectory of 2026, and we must face the cold reality. Geopolitics does not have a reset button. History is not a rubber band. It is a ratchet. It turns one way. And every notch we slip, we cannot get back simply by wishing it so. We are no longer dealing with speculation. We are dealing with a convergence. Look at the behavior of the global system right now. The hedging against the dollar that began as a precautionary measure a few years ago has hardened into structural policy. It is no longer a trade. It is architecture. When a foreign central bank moves its reserves from U.S. treasuries to gold or to a basket of currencies that excludes the dollar, they are not parking that money temporarily. They are building new plumbing. They are laying new cables. And once that infrastructure is built, they do not tear it down just because the American president changes his tone. The Trump discount on American power is now hard-baked into the price of everything. We are seeing the emergence of a parallel financial reality. It is not happening because China or Russia is offering a better product. It is happening because the United States is actively forcing the world to build a lifeboat that does not include us. Every time we weaponize the dollar for a short-term political stunt, we provide the economic viability for a competitor system. We are subsidizing our own obsolescence. We are creating the market demand for a post-American world. And this is the part that is hardest to swallow. We are losing our leverage without a single treaty being signed. We are losing it without a war being lost. We are losing it through the slow, steady accumulation of doubt. By the time 2026 is fully written, we will find that our sanctions no longer bite because the targets have already insulated themselves. We will find that our diplomatic calls go to voicemail because we have proven that our word expires every 4 years. We will find that we are shouting orders into a room that is quietly installed soundproofing. This trajectory does not self-correct. That is the critical insight. Erosion is efficient. It requires no energy to continue. It only requires neglect to accelerate. If we stay on this path, we do not need a catastrophic collapse to lose our standing. We do not need a Great Depression. We simply become irrelevant. We become a large, loud, volatile regional power, obsessed with its own internal culture wars, while the actual machinery of global commerce reroutes around us. We are watching the liquidation of the American century. And this brings us to the final clarity. This argument is not about whether you like the man in charge. It is not about whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. It is not about mean tweets or personality clashes. This is about the survival logic of the United States. You cannot claim to be a patriot and simultaneously cheer for the destruction of the institutions that secure American dominance. You cannot claim to put America first while systematically dismantling the credit, the trust, and the alliances that make America powerful. To support this trajectory is not nationalism. It is sabotage. The window for repair is narrowing with every passing quarter. Trust is the hardest asset to acquire and the easiest to lose. Precedents outlive administrations. The world is watching, and they are taking notes. They are learning that the United States is no longer a constant. It is a variable. And variables are risk. And risk is managed by diversification. We are watching the world diversify away from the United States. The shock of 2026 is not that the system breaks. It is that the system moves on without us. The trajectory is clear. The incentives are aligned. And unless we stop treating our own foundations as enemy territory, the outcome is inevitable. We are choosing to be smaller. We are choosing to be weaker. And we are running out of time to choose differently.